Here we can see more evidence of wave after wave, frozen in time, melted, pancaked brick lines, becoming viscous, flowing, hot. Everywhere you see, it begins to flow, and then it was hardened and frozen in time for us to see this waviness here. Here the floor, ground became so hot and viscous from the grid meltdown that you can see how it began to sink down. Notice these are parallel lines, and this is sinking down. Notice that this is sticking up as well, popping up from the sinking down here. This is popping up, see? The entire floor here became hot and viscous and then hardened right back up again. This is hard as a rock now. Again, when it hardened and cooled off from the X Factor event, cooled off, the grid meltdown cooled off, and boom, it's hard as a rock. Frozen in time for us to see that it was hot, dripping wet. Dripping, melting, like it would, like dripping wet. Here are the blocks that got cooked into block here. Huge blocks just cooked together from this X Factor event. Here you can see the wavy flow outward here in this way. The color is scorched black. And there's still a lot of red color here. It was viscous here. See the waviness. Again, the nature of our reality is when things become very, very hot, the solid begins to flow and become viscous, and it becomes liquid, and it begins to flow. Where it's cooled off the most, it hardens and solidifies and densifies the most. And where it's the hottest, it flows and becomes viscous the most. So where it's the hottest, it's the most liquid. Where it's the coldest, it's the most solid. This is the nature of heat. And this is the nature of melted buildings from the X Factor event. You can see how it flowed away from the building here. You can see how it flowed down and around. Whoops, the building here. Here it's flowing this way. Here you can see the melted building flowing out and away this way. Here you can still see the brick lines and the top of the building. Brick lines, brick lines, brick lines. Top of the building, more buildings in the background, melted, flowing outward down that way, brick lines, and again, it's survived in the building. There's a road coming here, and they're going inside the hollow building out the other side. To this day, it's a pocket of survival, and they can drive through the building here. Nobody carved this out. It just happened to work out, and they discovered that, hey, we can drive through here still. Or actually, we can drive through here. They built a road, obviously. This is on top of building here. Here, the bottom of the building got hot from the grid meltdown, X Factor event. Starts coming up the wall of the building, expanding out, and destroying the buildings from the heat. Here, the building literally sinks downward into the ground, and the liquid building flow begins to flow over. There's a liquid building flow. It's actually flowing over, forming rock curtains. flowing over the building here from it melting the other building here, and then this is sinking down in the ground because it should be level, not this way. The pancake brick lines have expanded out into block here. It's a melted building from the X Factor event, sink down into the ground. Here, more buildings, just brick lines just melted like ice cream. Here, buildings, tops of buildings, what's left of them, A-framing from the heat and melting. It's all turned to dust. This was hot and flowing like a liquid lava of melted building at one point during the X Factor event. More buildings melted and flowing. The brick lines literally just becoming viscous, solid into a liquid here. Tops of melted buildings everywhere we look. Scorched black marks as well. Upside down ice cream cone. Tops of buildings melted down. Inside of the buildings melted, hardened. More melted buildings. See how it melted out this way? It melted out this way, and it melted away from itself that way. And then got flooded here. Melted out this way. Again, the entire bottom of the building was flooded with hot liquid. Melted building like lava, and it literally scorched the bottom of the building here. Here, more melted building. And then they come in and use them and so forth. Here, more buildings completely melted. On the right here, the black, scorching, dripping, melted building. Here, the inside of melted buildings is what you would call a cave, but it's just melted buildings. You can see the wave after wave of the melting here. It's all the inside of melted buildings here. And again, the steps here literally have melted into each other here. Just like these steps have melted from the X Factor event. And then some more steps melted. More melted buildings, tops of melted buildings. Incredible flooded, melted, damaged building here. It must have been beautiful in its day. Here we have melted steps. Here this building just, I don't even know what to call it. It just melted into this, whatever you want to call this. Here you'll see the floor is just completely hot and begins to melt down into itself. Again, I show many times how the ground begins to become so hot from the grid meltdown that it just sinks down into itself. Here, these buildings have just been melted like butter, ice cream. The ceiling here completely melted, and here it's dripping. Again, this entire building has been turned into crystal. See the arch here? Brick lines. Or whatever rock you want to call it. It kind of looks like a crystal, but yeah, it's a building. Here, the heat has come up from the bottom. It managed to work its way all the way up to these arches of the building here and the top here. It's even started to mangle that. But this was all a building. It was all straight down like this. And it just starts to melt. Well, I mean, it was probably out here. Obviously, it's down here. Sorry about that. And this is a pocket of survival. It just survived, and it didn't quite melt it like it did the bottom. More melting. Again, you can see how this melted down over itself and down. This is melted down this way and then hardened again. It formed a rock curtain here and concealed the building behind itself. Here the brick building just began to melt down into the ground. These are the top of building here and brick lines here. Balloon rocks there. Dripping, melting, and then hardened in time for us to see. Here it's still looking kind of red brick, red lava looking. How it melted the buildings. These are tops of buildings here. The very tops. They're flooded. Again, the building here just completely dripping. I think I showed one, but this is a better close-up. Here, the buildings have just melted like ice cream. Same here, tops of buildings. Again, the bottom of the building has melted outward, away from itself here. Even the interior here is melted. Here, the building is just melted. More melted buildings everywhere you look. All mountains are melted buildings. No such thing as mountains. Again, the heat's coming up from the ground here, from the grid. Expanding, swelling out, marshmallowing out, balloon rocking outward. Pulling apart, separating. Melted here from the bottom. Just completely obliterated. Hot, melted, dripping, scorched. Look at the dripping here. I mean, just that almost looks like hot yellow liquid lava still. It used to be red brick with the concrete mold over it, but it's completely dripping wet. Not wet, but dripping like it was wet. Here, the red brick coming out in waves, layer after layer, melting and then hardening. Layer after layer flowing and then hardening back up again. Whoops. Just completely melted. There's hardly anything to... You really can't even tell this was a building, but this is a building that's been turned from a solid into a liquid. Into mush, like mud. Again, this is incredible evidence of, you can see the red brick, and then you can see the brick lines and the red brick, and then you can see the upgraded concrete molds over the brick. And then it's just melted into the brick together here. It's just coming off the brick here. But this building is just completely... I mean, that even looks like crystallized here in some areas of the brick here. I have to say. Here it's just melting. Here's some columns that survived somehow. Here it's just melted away from itself like ice cream. Hardened back up again. It still looks like a hot lava. It even has a red-orange brick color. Here the columns have melted. The floors are heat damaged, scorched. Here this building has completely sank down into itself with some pockets of survival down here. Brick lines, tops of buildings up here. Tops of buildings sticking out of the ground. Here the building's just melted like ice cream. Everywhere you look, melted like ice cream. Like a grid meltdown. The grid had a meltdown. Like ice cream. There's brick lines, upside down ice cream cones, roofs, brick lines. Melted like ice cream. You can see the direction it melts. Melted. Melted here. The brick lines are going this way and that way, and the arches are melted. Brick lines melting every which direction down into itself. Here, this just melted the interior. Here, the outside is forming a rock curtain and melting this way over this poor thing. It's getting hit. This all is getting rock curtain and covered up by itself. Melted like ice cream. Frozen in midair, the melting here, frozen in midair. Melted buildings. Again, the building just is getting mangled from the bottom here and actually from the top. It's just melted the top downward here. And then it's coming up from the bottom here as well. This building is just absolutely getting destroyed and melted. It's incredible. And then flooded to hide the evidence. Here the building is just melted outward like a circle. Melted like ice cream. Again, you can see how it's melted outward. You can see, you can literally draw the A-frames here. Just literally A-frame after A-frame. A-frame, A-frame, A-frames. These buildings just got melted. Again, you can see it flowing around the rock, and then it hardened again. This was all liquid, like lava flowing like a river around this rock here. And then it hardened. And then here you can clearly see how it melted out and away from itself. And here too. And here. Look at the top here, how it kind of got blackened when it melted. That's wild. Just more melted building. The whole side of this building has actually swollen out like a balloon. This building here just completely blackened and scorched and melted. Another angle of this I showed earlier of this coming up, melting all the way up to the top almost. Here at the bottom, it's just completely swollen and damaged the building from the hot X factor event and become flooded in itself. Here you have brick lines melted like ice cream. Here you can see how the main part of the building here, here's the top of the building here, and then the bottom of the building, and you can see how it's melted outward and downward. And away from itself here. You can see how it made new land here when it melted. And over here, and here. Forming new land when it hardened back up again. Here, more melted building. You can see how it melted down this way. You can see how this melted. You can see how this kind of melted this way. It's all buildings melted. All islands and continents are tops of melted buildings. Here's an arch here that somehow survived the melting. Here the concrete melted red brick building has melted downward here, forming a rock curtain. Literally, there is a curtain there, and the water irrigation system is still intact and flowing, and you can still see the building here, and water still flowing out of it, and it's melted downward. Everything, everywhere you look, melted buildings. And again, this is fantastic evidence here. This is not snow. It's concrete. This is all hard as a rock concrete. Okay? Looks like snow. It's concrete. This right here is hard as a rock. It hardened back up like a rock because that's what it was concrete. See the black scorch marks there? Here it looks like this became viscous, and then some type of hot heat field has just made some type of impressions in the concrete here when it was hot. It's just weird, like a field. It looks like a field has made its impressions on this building here. You know, that's what it looks like to me. And again, all melted buildings. You can see the brick lines and arches in the background. Here, this building just completely melted down in the inside here. Here you can see the melting away from the building. Here you can see more melting away. Whoops, forming new land here. The floor here is completely melted. All these buildings are completely melted. You can still see the brick lines here and the street in between the buildings here. Here you can see how the building has leaked out and this way from itself, forming A-frames and countless A-frames and new land. Here you have orange hot scorch marks. Here you have the building actually just melting down on itself. You can still see the top of the dome here, windows, arches, and columns. Everywhere you look, melted buildings. It's just dripping hot wet. I mean, like it would be wet. Again, look how the building has melted outward from itself, creating new land and over itself. Hot, blackened, scorched, dripping red brick melted. Just incredible. Here you can see like holes from it pulling apart when it became viscous. Here you can see how it was dripping wet like lava. Very similar to lava. Here the brick lines have just souped, formed like a soup, melted down into the ground, melted into itself. More buildings, tops of buildings, flooded and sticking out of the ground, kind of like Planet of the Apes. Here, this building is completely, flooded at the bottom here, where the heat looks like it came up, forming A-frames, melting the building. You got rock curtains here dripping down, brick lines, melted buildings, like Planet of the Apes here. When you see, you're only missing Statue of Liberty sticking out of the beach here. Here you have brick lines becoming viscous, separating, forming these holes, and then hardening back up again. Here you can see countless brick lines, dripping hot, melted building, kind of red and black here when it got hot and dripped. Same here. Here, this is Australia. Here you can really see the pancaked brick lines, formations of the buildings, over and over, brick line after brick line after brick line, tops of the domes, the buildings, all sticking out of the ground, tops of buildings flooded, sticking out of the ground. Again, it's not a valley or a gorge. These are just in between the buildings in here. It's in between buildings here. More melted buildings. And again, look at the right here, how it was hot and viscous and melted and smoothened. Here you can see that it was hot and viscous, and it was flowing wave after wave, and it hardened back up. And again, the irrigation system is still flowing out of the tops of these buildings. Here you can see how it was dripping wet down. This is almost a pocket of survival here, but it's unrecognizable. Tops of buildings sticking out of the ground. Melted buildings inside them. Here you can almost make out the red bricks. A whole line of bricks here being cooked into block. That's the brick, all brick there. This is what's left of the red brick after it gets melted by the X factor of that